So we have had a lot of ICE arrests outside of immigration court here in San Antonio. We've been seeing it for the past few weeks. I spoke to immigration advocates who tell me they are noticing a new trend. Minors are showing up without parents, without lawyers. And so ICE is not dismissing their cases. The judges aren't dismissing those cases, and they're not being detained. Could you kind of explain why that's happening, why these unaccompanied minors aren't detained?
Sure. So the reason that ICE is detaining adults and moving to dismiss their cases is to place them in what's called expedited removal, which is an administrative process that allows ICE to issue a deportation order without allowing somebody the opportunity to present their case before a judge. Um, Minors who are classified as unaccompanied minors, meaning they didn't enter with a parent or legal guardian, are not legally able to be processed for expedited removal. So that's just simply not an option for ICE to do because the law that Congress passed in creating expedited removal specifically exempts unaccompanied minors from being processed like that. So they essentially they legally can't do what they're doing with adults to unaccompanied minors because they could arrest the minors, but the minors would still be in removal proceedings. They would still have to see an immigration judge in order to resolve their case and determine whether or not they're going to ultimately be ordered removed.
So let's say the child did enter with a parent, but now that they're going through their immigration court hearings, they're showing up alone. Does that still put them in the category of unaccompanied and so they can't go through the expedited removal?
If they entered with a parent and were processed with a parent, they're not considered an unaccompanied minor. So, but what typically happens in that case is that um, it's what's called a consolidated proceeding, and so the child wouldn't be going to court alone. The child is going to court tied to their parent's case, so the cases are heard together.
But let's say, for instance, the parent gets deported or the parent goes back and the child stays here and is now going through those court proceedings alone. Does that still put them in kind of that classification that they cannot go through expedited removal?
Right. If they're still a minor, if they're under for immigration purposes, a minor is someone who's under 21 and unmarried. If they're classified as an unaccompanied minor, then they're not amenable to expedited removal.
Okay. And so another thing that I wanted to ask, I know there is some sort of agreement or law, I don't know what it is specifically, that says minors, children can't be in detention for more than 20 days. It's not fair. I don't know what to call it. But so could you kind of explain what that agreement is, what it says?
Um, I think you're referring to the Flores settlement, and what that settlement means is that minors are supposed to be held in the least restrictive setting for the shortest amount of time. There definitely are thousands of minors who are held past the 20 days. But when an unaccompanied minor is taken into custody, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is the custodian for minors, is supposed to make efforts to release the minor to a family member or friend um, to, essentially take charge of the minor. And if there is no person identified, a family member in the US as a sponsor, uh, the minor is supposed to be held in the least restrictive setting, and there is a completely separate foster system for ORR. And so there are children who are released into the care of families that have been vetted, just like our state Child Protective Services Agency has foster families. The Office of Refugee Resettlement also has foster families who have been vetted and agree to essentially provide a home for these unaccompanied children while they're going through the court proceedings.
Okay, perfect. And so with all of the recent ICE arrests that are going on, I'm assuming, the system is a little more saturated than usual with minors who may not have parents here. So in those cases, or let's say these, immigration detention facilities become overpopulated, what ends up happening? Because I know they can't be expedited, they can't go through expedited removal. So does something else kick in where they kind of speed up the process for that child?
Not, the court doesn't have a mechanism to speed up the process. So, I mean, ORR is already under orders to process children for release as quickly as possible. But I mean, I know for sure in the adult context, the detention centers are overcrowded. Many detention centers are past capacity. For unaccompanied minors, because we haven't had as much interior enforcement as we have for the adult population, I really don't know what the capacity is like. Typically, those facilities mostly housed recent border crossers, but because it is very, very difficult to cross the border right now, there's, been a lower influx of people.
Okay. Is there something I haven't touched on or asked you about when it comes to minors, their immigration process, and then detention that you think is important for people to hear, or you think it's important to give context to?
I think it's very, very important for people to know that for a very long time, the federal government provided funding to nonprofit organizations to represent unaccompanied minors who were detained in ORR custody. And those funding programs have been cut. And that means that you have children as young as toddlers who can barely talk, who are expected to represent themselves in immigration court. You have children who had lawyers who got fired from their jobs because there was no funding left to pay them, and their lawyers were forced to withdraw from their cases. And now those children are having to represent themselves in removal proceedings. And it's frankly really sad, a horrible reflection on this administration that we are leaving the most vulnerable populations to fend for themselves in a system that has been described as a labyrinth, even for adults to navigate.
So, I mean, for these children who are going through these legal proceedings and no longer have attorneys, I mean, what's next for them?
Um, it's a good question. The judges are required to basically screen and identify if they believe that the child is eligible for any relief and tell them essentially what relief they can apply for. So there are kids who are eligible for asylum who may be able to apply for asylum relief. Also, there's a different immigration remedy called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, which is designed for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents, and for whom it's not in their best interest to return to their home country. Many unaccompanied children are eligible for SIJ status. However, in order to pursue that with immigration, first they have to get an order from a state court judge that essentially makes findings about the best interest of the child and their custody placement. And that is next to impossible to do without a lawyer, because they have to initiate a lawsuit in Bexar County, for example, before a district court that has jurisdiction over family matters. And so it is really an extremely daunting situation, and the available nonprofit organizations that provide free legal services cannot come close to meeting the needs of the kids who need those services.
Okay, perfect. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Just one last thing about children showing up alone. I expect that a lot of the children who are showing up to court alone are doing so because their family members who they were released to are afraid of getting detained themselves if they accompany the child. So my guess is that they're waiting outside, off-site in close proximity to the immigration court. And the kids are going in by themselves because the family members have been made aware that there are ICE agents looking for people to detain.